Senior Policy Director at Transportation for Massachusetts. We are a statewide coalition of over 30 member organizations in a better transportation system for everyone. Visit us at c4ma.org to learn more about Transportation for Mass. Today's panel will hopefully be an engaging discussion on transportation funding in Massachusetts, an assessment of how we are doing, and then how Western Mass is benefiting or not benefiting from recent investments in transportation. Just some background. I think most folks know this, but just to rehash, in November of 2022, voters went to the polls and overwhelmingly voted for the Fair Share Amendment for the Millionaires Tax. So thank you for all of you who voted in support of it. That is a 4% surtax on incomes over $1 million in Massachusetts. It has overperformed expectations and raised about $3 billion per year since its inception. And that money is specifically required to be spent on education and transportation. But right now, I think we are facing some headwinds when it comes to federal funding, and as well as a potential ballot question for November that could reduce the state income tax from 5% to 4%, which would cost the state an annual revenue of $5 billion per year. So you have some very interesting and great guests today. So I'm going to introduce them and then we'll get started. So just so folks know, this is being recorded. We will do some presentations from our panelists and some Q&A with the panelists, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I'm going to start with Representative Trish Farley-Bouvier from Pittsfield. She is represents Pittsfield, where she has attended local schools, graduating from Pittsfield High School. She began her career as a teacher, earning a BA in special education from Salve Regina, and completing her MA at the University of Connecticut, taught students overseas, and worked to support Berkshire County's immigrant population as director for the Industry Network of South Berkshire. Representative Farley-Bouvier was elected to state legislature in October of 2011. She led the years-long effort to pass the landmark Work and Family Mobility Act, which allows for drivers in the Commonwealth to be trained, licensed, and insured, regardless of immigration status. She serves as the chair of the Joint Committee on Advanced Information Technology, the Internet, and Cybersecurity, and was the lead on the most recent data privacy bill passed by the House of Representatives. So thank you very much for your work on that. And welcome, Representative Farley-Bouvier. Carolyn Mish is director of the City of Northampton's Office of Planning and Sustainability, has been serving in that role since 2022. She has nearly 30 years of experience leading implementation of climate resilience, adaptation, and sustainable growth principles and strategies for state and local government agencies to assist in achieving equitable quality of life goals based on community values. In 2024, Carolyn directed, on behalf of the now expanded Valley Bike Share program, the relaunch of the program across 8 communities in UMass. In this relaunch, Northampton and the communities are playing a much more integrated role to ensure success in this micromobility transportation system. And finally, Phineas Boxendall, Director of Research and Policy Analysis at Mass Budget and Policy Center, where he has also served as the organization's transportation researcher since 2015. He has published transportation analysis as Mass Budget, cover topics ranging from the impact of the Fair Share Amendment, the condition of the Commonwealth bridges, the result of Fair Creek policies, the regional transit authorities, and sales tax funding at the MBTA, among other topics. Thank you all for joining us today. With that started, we will start with Phineas and his presentation.
Is this working? Sure.
Well,
Working that? Yeah. All right. So use the mic here. So, I first of all just really glad to be here, and I want to thank the forum for sort of prompting me to really think more about what does regional equity mean for transportation funding. It's sort of a catchphrase that I sort of hear a lot and nod my head with, and sort of thought, okay, what we struggle to think about what I'm trying to put some sort of meat on that concept. How would I try and think about it. But let me first put up in this next slide, just the basic transportation funding system. This is from back from fiscal, not basic in that sense, but just, I mean, the impression is one where you can see lots and lots of different dedicated funding sources. So don't worry about
why we need people like Phineas.
don't worry about the particulars of this so much as, the impressions. One of the things you see is tons of different sources, lots of dedicated sources, most of which pour into two big funds, the Commonwealth Transportation Fund and the Massachusetts Transportation Trust Fund. And a lot of the money, the thickness of the arrow is how much money it is. A lot of the money ends up going to debt service. So you see some very thick arrows that go into debt service. You also see a big thick arrow of sales tax there that's representative. I know it's going to have something to say about afterwards. But and this is all from before the Fair Share Amendment. Right, so this is in some ways quite incomplete. We haven't updated this since then, but in the next slide it talks about the Fair Share Amendment has been a lot more money than expected. It's been a lot more money expected if you were looking at the voter guide back when you had to choose whether or not to vote on fair share or not. It said that the Executive Office of Administration and Finance projects $1.4 billion a year from fair share. And instead, we are getting about $3 billion a year. So one of the things you may ask is, how can there's both this 2.7 to what was spent and an additional 1.3, how can there be something like $4 billion a year being spent in fair share money? That's because these big underestimates the first year. The first year they said 1 billion, and then they said, okay, maybe we undershot, we'll make it 1.3 billion, but they're collecting much more than that. So there was big collections that then get spent out. So one of the things to know about that is the fair share money, not because it's not wildly successful, but the amount of fair share money kind of coming through the door, it can't be $4 billion a year every year if we're collecting $3 billion a year. At some point or another, the amount that we're collecting and the amount that we're spending have to be the same, right? So in that way, we're going to see less fair share money, not because we're not collecting much, but we won't have the backlog of under projections in past years. So, and the fair share money has been a real game changer for a lot of things. A lot of systems after the pandemic, places like Pennsylvania, huge crises. Could they keep their transit systems going? They had huge budget crises. We didn't here because of fair share. We were able to give a lot more money to the RTAs. We were able to do free RTA service. A lot of kind of expansionary good things. A handful of quite small dollar things targeted more particularly to more rural areas, such as for unpaved roads or rural school aid or micro transit. None of these things are necessarily exclusively sort of Western Mass, but and they've all been pretty small dollar, but they wouldn't exist if not for fair share. And so that statement itself, you wouldn't get nothing if not for it. I don't think that qualifies as equity, but it's just setting the terrain for our conversation. And so it's next slide will the fair share money certainly isn't enough for our state transportation system. The kind of workhorses of our transportation system are, we have a dedicated sales tax to the MBTA and dedicated gas tax plan. And both the sales tax has really underperformed what it was supposed to, and gas taxes are also, not growing. When they dedicated, they didn't think about electric cars. They didn't have this idea that the gas tax would be a declining revenue feature. But those workhorses are not working as hard as they should. And then there's things like, the MBTA's its capital needs were estimated $25 billion a few years ago. So that's this kind of giant sucking hole in the amount of revenue. And there's all these other needs for things like climate resilience for the infrastructure we have. There's big opportunities for things like West East Rail, which are completely unfunded at this point. The building of them, at least. So there's a lot of more funding which is necessary, even though we've avoided these pitfalls and we've done some real big things that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So I'll just say also with that money, just to recall that it's not only transportation money, it's also education money. And there's also big needs. If this was an education forum, we'd be talking about, the big needs in early education or K-12 education or higher ed. So it's a shared pool that way. But as the next slide will get into, I tried to think, and these are sort of flawed, but attempted trying to think about like what do we mean by regional equity in transportation. So these are sort of some thoughts. One of them is just that the differences that we have should matter. So if it's a place with a lot more older people, then there should be a way and a spending and investment to make sure that folks who are older and may have more trouble getting to places, less access to being able to drive, for instance, that should be a need that would be recognized. Our sort of differences in need get addressed through differences in spending. That's a general concept that should matter in transportation. And then our differences, the regional differences in political power should not translate into differences in investment. And there are regional differences in power. And I can't really say whether those directly translate into differences that way, but they should. And then, our investments in infrastructure should be connecting and including people, not excluding the less wealthy regions. If you think about transportation as connecting and including, and if you kind of step back and say, oh, well, is it accomplishing that the way that we're investing that? And then last, thinking about transportation policies, at a minimum, they should be improving all regions' ability to access the essential things like jobs and healthcare and education. I think I want to just call out something in this next slide, which is a real kind of, I think is going to be a real area of kind of contention, and it's a sort of a detail where I think a lot of fights will happen around regional equity, and which is around population trends. So the next slide here, the big blue line is the Massachusetts population, and the other lines are the westernmost counties, with the Berkshires being the red one there. And so I think that there are a lot of kinds of formulas and such funding formulas where it just says, okay, if population is going down, then money goes down to that area. And that can be really problematic because, well, for a lot of reasons, we can become a self-fulfilling prophecy for one, but it also because people have, permanent kind of fixed costs that don't go away. We see this a lot, also in school enrollment, where, just because ICE may be driving the kids away from showing up at school and aren't on the rolls anymore, it doesn't mean that the school doesn't have to still pay for its teachers and its electricity and things like that. So there's a similar kind of problem in transportation. And this gets a lot of the kind of school aid formulas right now. There's a lot of fights that are going on about, like, well, should it be per capita? Should it not be per capita? Should it be lane mile? Should it be, these are the kinds of, the terrain where a lot of those fights are happening around regional equity are about these kind of what counts for local aid. So I just wanted to call that out as something. The next slide here is just to call out a real sort of threat for our ability to deliver on regional equity. Regional equity costs money, being able to have good transportation and being able to address disparities costs a lot of money. And just that there are these big sort of threats to our ability to have the resources in the next election, these 2 ballot questions, one which would, lead to a $5 billion decrease in how much revenue we have by cutting the income tax. And this is, it won't be officially on the ballot until next month when things are sent to the printer and there's a court case that could take it off the ballot. But if it is on the ballot and if it does pass, then every area, including transportation, is going to be retrenching in what it can do. Every area is going to be sort of, with these terrible trade-offs between, well, sort of, are we addressing equity or are we just kind of keeping the lights on? And I just want to call those out. The second ballot question is one which is a revenue cap, which has existed for 40 years, but not really activated, but would become much more often, and would just force the state to then send back a portion of the money that it gets the way we modeled it, it would be about every 3 years if it had existed in the last 40. But it would, worse than that, sort of make planning a lot harder, because often it would be kind of arbitrary things about timing mismatches and stuff. And so late in the session, when the legislature is often most productive, they're going to be suddenly told, hey, you've got $2 billion in refunds that you have to send. And then say, okay, well, we're going to scrap that exploratory funding for West East Rail or whatever it was that they might have been considering. A lot of things are going to get scrapped. So just wanted to hold those out, and hopefully that starts a conversation.
Thank you, Phineas. I think you ended on a very high note. William from Rep. Farley Bouvier.
Okay, great. I'm not very good at sitting still, so that was long enough for me to sit still. Sorry for all of you. If you want to get up and like stand in the back or whatever, please feel free. It'd be helpful for me if I knew who was here. So can people tell me if you are from Hampden County? Right, Hampshire County? Way to represent. Anybody from Franklin? Berkshire?
Berkshire in the house.
Thank you. And from outside the 4 Western Mass County? Thank you. How was your commute today? I call that the reverse commute. So transportation touches everything, right? We talk about transportation equity. We're talking about access, food equity. We're talking about education equity. We're talking about employment equity, access to employment. And I will tell you that people I hear the most about transportation right now are employers, because employers are looking for workers who can get to work. But transportation is a really big concern. In the Berkshires, we have a couple of factories that are manufacturing facilities that have swing shifts. And so, 1 week they can get to work, but the next week they can't because the buses don't run at those times. So it really is very important. And when I think about equity, it's not hard for me to compare the investments and what happens at the MBTA and what it means for the people who live there compared to what happens with the BRTA. You can get on the T to do just anything you want. Really, right? You can go to doctor's appointments, you can go out, you can do it at almost any time of day or night. You certainly can get back and forth to work. Employers invest in the T by buying passes or passes. And all those things are not available to people in the Berkshires. She told me to keep the mic stick close, so I'm trying to remember to do that. So I also want to talk about this fair share amendment. It has made a tremendous difference. So I literally thank each and every one of you, because if it wasn't for that grassroots advocacy, we wouldn't have been able to pass it. And it was Western Mass who got that over the line. right? Absolutely, when you look at the numbers, it was these 4 counties that got it over the line. If this were decided in the Boston metro area, we would have lost. We would have absolutely lost. And so with that, there's that tricky word called fair in the fair share amendment. And while I think it is very fair the way we collect that revenue, I don't think it's very fair how we distribute that revenue. Phineas, your term of the great sucking hole that is the MBTA is absolutely true. I agree that there needs to be tremendous investment there to get it up to speed. And to, like, we were actually really in trouble with previous federal administration when it came to the T for very, very serious safety issues. And it has to be addressed. But we're not even hearing yet from powers that be in Boston that give us a couple of years to really invest in the T, and then we'll be able to address it. We're not even hearing that. And so it doesn't feel fair to me about how these funds are being distributed. And if he had caught up on all his lines, the thickness of his lines on that big confusing chart that you saw, the lines going into the MBTA from fair share is like the disparity between MBTA and RTA has only grown with the fair share amendment. And I think we should all be really concerned about that. And again, why are you all here? Because you're really good at advocacy, right? And so we really need those voices to say we need these investments here. And it's not because they quite haven't thought of us yet here in Western Massachusetts. True story, my father as a young man in his 20s would take the train from Pittsfield on a Sunday, watch a Red Sox game, buy a hot dog that was important to him, and come back the same day. Okay, so that meant that was like late 40s, early 50s, he was doing that. And so it hasn't been that we haven't yet invested in Western Massachusetts. It's over the years we have disinvested in transportation in Western Massachusetts. There used to be a trolley line between Pittsfield and Dalton, right? That doesn't exist anymore because why? We've disinvested. We've disinvested it, number one, because as a country, what do? We invested in the highways, right? In car transportation, which we're all paying for now, right? So we have to change that narrative. Right along with that, you saw Phineas's, I told Phineas I was going to rip off every one of his slides. And you see me doing that. You saw Phineas's slide around population trends. Population trends just don't happen, right? Because some natural thing or people have, new ideas themselves or TikTok videos decide to let them, no. Population trends happen because of policy decisions. Every one of them happen because of policy decisions. And so when we invest in public transportation, we are investing in economic development. We are investing in our education systems. We are investing in community and what's it like to be a community, right? And because of that disinvestment over many years, we are seeing the population decline. And then they say, well, not enough people live there to invest there, so why are we giving them money? No, and so we are in this spiral, as Phineas alluded to. So we have to buck that trend. We need to change that narrative, and we do have an opportunity right now because of the fair share amendment. And so we need to come together. We need to decide what is it we want? Because they're kind of asking for that, right? Leadership is asking, well, what do you want? Right? And I'm like, okay, we have a couple ideas, okay? So one, transportation isn't just about public transportation. So I'm not gonna stick to that, but I just want to allude to, we do need to invest in our roads and bridges. We do need to fix the friggin' culverts, right? Culverts are a big, huge problem in the 4 Western Mass counties. Big problem. And, with climate resiliency, those have to be prioritized, and we just have so many of them. I mean, Franklin County, oh my God, so many culverts there, right? Talk about a sucking whole, right? I mean, it's like, but then now I'm gonna move to public transportation. People said, how about fare free for RTAs? And I'm gonna admit, I was like, no, that's the most important thing. And okay, it is important. I will tell you in BRTA, ridership has gone up 13–15%, over the last year, and since 2020, I don't know how much, but it's very significant. And paratransit has also gone up because of that. And so keeping the RTAs fare free, I'm completely on board for that. I think the next best thing in the 4 Western Mass counties, in particular, when it comes to public transportation, is microtransit. Microtransit is a way that's going to really address the needs of people to get to work, to get to medical appointments, to go out socially, to see friends. It doesn't, people should be able to do whatever they want with public transportation, not just be like, oh, I have to be a senior citizen and I need to be going to a medical appointment to get a ride, right? They should be able to do all the things. I will tell you in Berkshire County, if you are a client facing, you work directly with people and you are a nonprofit, you have a van. You have to. How do you get your people places, right? That's not a requirement or a need in the Metro Boston area for every organization, to have that load on themselves, on their own budgets. So what I've noticed is that microtransit organizations, they're all over the state, and they're really different from each other. Why? Because they've met the need of their own community, which I think is great. And we kind of need to pull together in a way to say there's some standards for each one. We don't have that down quite right. And we haven't really figured out the relationship between the local microtransit and their, RTA that's in their region. So those conversations need to happen. We have to come to some agreements and make a proposal to leadership so that we can have sustainable funding for microtransit. I'm not that interested in the BRTA only having their buses run up and down the county. I really want it to meet the needs of individuals, and we can do it, especially with the technology we have that we didn't have 10 years ago, right? We can call, well, I can't call it Uber Berkshire County. It's not reliable. But as one would call an Uber, we would be able to book a ride on microtransit. We should be. So advocacy works. That's why you're here. Sorry, I just yelled that one, right? But I really wanted you to hear that. Advocacy works. Having these conversations with your own state rep, having your conversation, pulling together as a network works. And if we can come up with our priorities, whether it comes budgetary or policy-wise, we can move the needle when it comes to transportation here. I can't possibly end. You'll hear this at least 3 more times from me. It is extremely important for each and every one of you. See, some of you have understood that you have to write this down because it's so important. So I really want you to get this one. Every single one of you have to fight like hell against this ballot question that Phineas talks about. It will ruin all of our plans. It will be terrible. And all it is the millionaires getting back at us for passing the fair share. And if they pass it, it will be more than twice as much money as we're earning in the fair share. And it's incredibly important for each and every one of you to fight like hell against that. They say they're lying to you. You say, oh, you're going to save $1,200 every year. That sounds pretty good. No, that's the average, right? Well, you're averaging with the person making $1 million. But what are you going to save, right? What are the people that you advocate going to be saving? For those who earn less than, what, $45,000 or so? I don't know, I think it's like $43,000. They're going to save $0. And these are the people we're advocating for the most. So now you're gonna hear from a person who really knows, does all the work and knows.
Thanks. I'm not sure how I feel now, because certainly after Phineas spoke, I was really impressed. This is inspirational about, like, you know, continuing the fight, good fight for transportation. I mean, I was asked to talk about sort of our experiences in the region for micromobility transportation in the context of Valley Bike Share. And so I'm going to talk about the funding, sort of generally give you an overview of the service area, the history and our struggles with funding to keep this new access, what we really want is equitable access, and then why it's important to have bike share, micromobility, and microtransit, as Brett was talking about, especially in this more rural, disparate context that we live in Western Massachusetts. So it's gonna go here. Yeah. So just quickly, you all may already know this, but the service area for Valley Bike Share is about 20 miles north to south, 9 miles east to west. We've got about 624,000 folks in the region, but within the participating communities, it's about half of that. And we started out in 2018, and I'll go through the history a little bit, but we have about 400 e-assist bikes. They're all e-assist bikes, serving, again, dispersed lower density populations, which extends the first and last mile of transit access. And our key goal in developing bike share was really to create equity for people across income levels and across where they live, so residential areas. And so it was important to create a station-based model, which many bike share systems are, but there are some that are not. And we have an active access pass program that allows for reduced membership for people who are income eligible for that. And we see in the numbers that those are got a lot of robust ridership in that category, particularly year round. But we also have bike share as for commuting and recreational use and just one-off use. But it really, our goal is to really sort of continue to fill in these service areas. This map is also just shows that the region, but the color blocks are showing the EJ areas in each of the communities. And so you will see that the bike icons are really focused in our environmental justice community areas, because we really are trying to ensure that we're providing transportation for everyone. And just quick history, we launched in 2018. Northampton was the lead community for the entire region, not because we feel like we're the best community to lead this, but no one else wanted to take the reins, and we said, look, we got to try this. And it was funded, so we started with just 5 communities across the region: Springfield, Holyoke, Northampton, Amherst, South Hadley, and University of Massachusetts. We were able to purchase bikes through federal funding, so congestion mitigation and air quality funding through the MPO, or the regional metropolitan planning organization that manages federal transportation funds. And it was a seasonal bike share at that point in 2018. So we shut down in November and restarted in about April-ish. That was difficult for, see my transfer to this program, and all the text got messed up. So sorry, I do spell check and I understood it at the time, but it's really got me. Yeah. So we had our operator had offered to provide this transportation service for free because they thought that it was such a big area and that they could develop a private sponsorship model that would cover the cost of operations. And in fact, that proved not to be viable, and I think it's not viable anywhere in this country. I think there are a few communities like Boston that benefit from having robust public investment in sponsorship or private investment in sponsorships that help just Boston and Cambridge and maybe one other community. But essentially, our operator could not function under that model. And so they turned to us and said, okay, communities, now you have to start paying us because it's too expensive to run this. And we said, no, we have a contract. We can't do that. We can't afford it anyway. So we shut down for a year. But at that time, we had East Hampton, Chicopee, and West Springfield had joined. And so it was clearly becoming a very important new transportation mode for the region, and more communities were interested. So we regrouped. We knew that we had to provide some public investment in terms of local government paying into the system. And all the communities at that time, after being up and running for 4 years, the leadership in those communities, the mayors, the other elected officials said, we can't lose bike share. This is too important for us. We will put money for this first year together, but then we have to figure out a long-term funding solution that brings in additional dollars. As we know, the private sponsorship is going to cover it. Membership or ridership won't cover it, but we need some outside support. So we relaunched in 2024 with a new operator. We are now year-round, so that was really important because it's for stability for the operational team. They can't lay off people in the middle of winter and then hope to bring them back in April. Also, even this past winter when we had crazy snow and cold for a month, we still had riders out there. So we know that people really depend on this. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week option for transportation. And so people were using it. So I just want to, with that history, sort of talk about the funding sources we've had for Valley Bike. And we've tried to cobble together a range of funding options. And so to start out for launch, there was regional money that we were able to receive through Pioneer Valley Planning Commission to help look at feasibility, identify where stations made sense to locate, and also sort of come up with a management structure. So that was going back to 2013 before, and all the way through launch, we had regional support. For launch, we had federal funding just for the infrastructure, but not operations. And as I said, our operator said, don't worry, guys, we got this. You don't need to pay us for operations, which clearly didn't work. As the system was underway, we started seeking, and each community was seeking separately state funding through one of those various pots that Phineas was showing about all those arrows and options for funding, which is a maze, and trying to figure out where should I go for money makes it very complicated, but communities were able to access money for infrastructure primarily. We also applied to, and I've got Mass CEC under here, under state, just because it's not quite state, but there is, it's beyond local and beyond regional. But we were successful in being able to work with Mass CEC for operational infrastructure funding to help stabilize the system so that we could, and also expand it into more communities where it was focused on equity and trying to get priority populations to benefit from bike share. So we are grateful for that, and we've been successful in these last 2 years since our launch in 2024. We've also tapped into MassDOT Shared Streets for infrastructure. Shared Streets program now has an option for funding operations, but I believe it's just for 3 years and only for new systems. So then you get launched and you've got this operational support, but then what happens after 3 years? And so that has been a difficult challenge for Bike Share, which is an older system. We couldn't access Shared Streets funding for operations. But now this year is the first year that Fair Share funding has come in to create a pot of money for microtransit and last mile. We were successful in getting a grant through that competitive process this year, thanks to the representatives and the whole legislative delegation actually in the Pioneer Valley, which really pushed for our grant application. They heard from the communities, which we're now 10 communities, thanks to expansion through our work with Mass CEC, but 10 communities in UMass. So all those communities sort of let their voices be known to the reps. And so we feel like that really helped us in getting a successful grant for Fair Share funds to pay for operations moving forward. And so this has been, we're really excited about this prospect that maybe if this can be sort of a consistent funding stream for microtransit and micromobility, that that will help support this type of transportation in more of a rural area, again, sort of reaching community members that where traditional transit, bus transit can't reach these residents in these areas. We've also, of course, I've said, used local money with municipal funds, revenues going in to relaunch Bike Share. And of course, we have a little bit of sponsorship, but that's really died back, especially when we were shut down for a year. And businesses are thinking, well, is this staying power? Should I invest in a sponsorship? And so we're still trying to build that sort of credibility back. And we hope that we can get some more sponsorships, but that's not a guarantee. And so none of this is guaranteed. And so it's really hard to plan, like, where should we expand and what, because there are communities that have come to us, you know, Belchertown. I just got a request from Southampton about wanting to join Valley Bike. And so we can't really think about that until we understand what the landscape is for future operations. And of course, memberships only cover about 20% of the Bike Share operational cost. And so, I mean, it's like any transportation system, it doesn't pay for itself. Even, you know that about fleets of bridges, gas tax doesn't pay for covering that.
Indeed.
So these pictures just show sort of on the top is our original launch back in 2018, and the lower picture shows now our new bikes are and launching new stations as we try to expand. But the impact of consistent funding is really, I want to go over that a little bit. We've estimated for the Pioneer Valley, it's probably less than $1 million a year, but it covers the entire region. That whole 20-mile stretch and east to west 9 miles or so. And so we feel like the bang for the buck is pretty good because we can cover a huge area for much less than it costs to rebuild a road for $20 million, $30 million. And so we can't rely on sponsorships. We can't rely on memberships to cover the cost, as I said. The other thing about having consistent funding is creating those connections with the existing transit system. So in Pioneer Valley, we have Pioneer Valley Transit Authority and as our regional transit, but they're struggling for funding for the bus network. So we ultimately, like, my dream would be, let's merge these transportation systems and not have multiple disparate and sort of competing transportation functions. But that's not going to work if there's not a consistent funding stream for all those different types of transportation. And certainly from our perspective, City of Northampton running a regional transportation, a bike share program for cities that are 3-4 times bigger than Northampton and trying to, deal with the MOUs and so forth, is not the same kind of expertise that already a regional transportation system has. And there's all synergies too about sort of connecting with last mile transit. So people taking the bus can then see, oh, I can also jump on, bike share. And then there are other infrastructure needs related to transportation to encourage these different types of movement through the community. So it's important to also look at physical infrastructure, bike lanes and shared use paths to support these other means of getting around. So that's another need. And then why we think and why the community's involved in bike share, think it's so important is the not only equitable access and 24/7 access for folks, but it's a mode that helps us with our decarbonization goals. And certainly we can reach a greater population this way in micromobility, bike share, and so forth. And this kind of system, as I mentioned, dovetails with the other investments that are happening statewide with roadway infrastructure that are now being sort of converted and rebuilt as complete streets. So that is
Amazing. Is this a quiz?
No. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Just a couple questions from me, and then I'll turn it over to you folks in your very insightful question. One thing that I've noticed in our work, and you've probably seen, and I think Phineas has pointed this out, and it came up at an RTA session earlier, is that it seems like there's a lot of grant programs that are competitive for things outside of roadway infrastructure and dedicated use to sales tax to the MBTA. Just curious if any of you have thought about what does that look like for a dedicated source for RTA funding, for microtransit, bike share, things like that. So I think it was brought up earlier, you're not going to start a new service if you don't have the operational dollars year to year, and you have to fund insurance, employment and labor and things like that. So are there any ideas out there other than maybe another penny on the sales tax to these other services that don't go to the MBTA? Or it just seems like it's always like, oh, we'll do a grant, but we already have proof of concepts. So like, what does that look like? And how does that benefit Western Massachusetts?
I'm happy to take that. So I'll first say what my wish is, and it's their expression like this is wishes for horses or something, like it's an unrealistic wish. But if Berkshire County could keep the more than $30 million a year in pennies that we send to the MBTA for transportation within Berkshire County, public transportation, we'd be in pretty good shape, wouldn't we? It's very hard to get an exact number on that, but it was estimated, this was years ago, to be about $30 million. That's a lot of money leaving Berkshire County just for the MBTA. And I can tell you with great confidence that the great majority of my constituents have never, ever, one time in their life, taken the T. And that goes back to the disinvestment in public transportation that we've seen. I think a different idea that could be explored is if we did a penny, half penny or something that stays in the area. It's been proposed in the municipality or in the region in which it's collected. And then there would be decisions that could be made for that area. And, you know, for the Berkshires, that would be, if it were for example, the BRT catchment area, we do get a lot of tourism in the Berkshires. And so we'd like to spend other people's money, right? And so that would be an idea. So I would say we're not gonna get the penny back, right? Our penny back, like I would say a lot of times, just give me back my penny. I'm not gonna get that penny back, but perhaps something from the gas tax that could be spent each. He's the policy expert.
It's a great question. I don't have a good answer to it. I mean, I think one thing which has been talked about is ride share, you know, where there are a lot of places where the fees on that are higher than it is in Massachusetts, you know, where they might have like $1 per ride fee or something like that. And if it would be really interesting if that was dedicated to something or a pool of things which included something like microtransit, where the collection might be more urban, but the spending might be less urban, would be a very interesting kind of counterbalance to your pennies there. I want to just take one moment to just clarify about sucking sounds of the MBTA. Because my reference before was to the unfunded capital needs, the deferred capital needs, those $25 billion in capital needs, the MBTA being a source of attracting lots of money, which can feel like a big suck hole. The MBTA, I would never want to characterize as
You can leave that to me. I just on the Uber, so we do have a fee attached to the Uber rides now. I think it's 10 cents a ride and it goes 20 cents and it goes to the municipality. I will tell you that, you know, some of my friends who represents small rural towns, it costs more to file the paperwork to get your 20 cents than it is in the actual money you get back. Like look at a place like Worthington, you know. So that to just go into the town that you're in wouldn't be a solution, because we would just be doing that. You know, people who have more get more, people who have less get less. So.
Carolyn, thoughts on dedicated funding for either Northampton or bike share?
I mean, I think, I don't have any ideas about how we get dedicated funding. Now I'm more focused on making sure we don't lose what we have that's coming in for conservation funding. But as I said in my presentation, I think it's critical to have some distribution of the things that have been proven that are beneficial to communities, so that communities don't have to keep going through every grant cycle every year again, because you can't plan. So you know, I don't have, these guys are the people with the power to make this decision.
All right, that I think I'll open it up to questions. I will want to point out though that 20-cent fee was scheduled to expire at the end of this year, and the legislature just voted to eliminate the expiration. There's still more work to be done. And I believe the House had a years ago during COVID, when you did the transportation funding bill, that would have taken a pool of the T&C fees, raised them, but also given a pool of that to the RTA's dedicated funding source. Netted out to like $12 million, which is not a lot, but it was something. So anybody have any questions for our panelists?
Come on.
Yeah.
I'll give you one. I'm just kind of trying to understand how the towns pay into regional transit. Is it kind of like up to their discretion? So you have to give a certain percentage based on their tax brackets that they, I don't know, like, how does it work?
I don't know, each town gets an assessment either from the MBTA or the RTAs, depending on what service they get.
Do some get both assessments?
Some do get both, but I don't think they necessarily have to pay both.
Okay.
Like I live in Kingston on the South Shore. I think we only pay the MBTA assessment because we have a station.
Okay.
But Sandra, I don't know if you have, you probably have a better idea of how much you get from each town and why.
PBTA does it a little differently. We do it based on the total miles and the passengers. So each community, the miles that each community receives and the total passengers that are carried in the paratransit system. So the total cost of the service, once you take all the revenues like the state and everything else, whatever's left, then it's divided amongst the 24 communities based on miles and ridership. So it's every year is calculated again. And so the amount increases by 2.5%, and then it's all spread out as a set total, and you spread all the miles and that percentage is built to each of the communities. And in the PBTA service area, the university and 5 colleges pay a portion of the miles for those communities where the 5 college service is located and the university. So they pay the share that the town would pay.
And it's also my understanding that if you are not an RTA community or an MBTA community, there has to be an affirmative vote to join, right, by the select board or city council or whoever. So it's a choice to join the system, but you also get an assessment for the service.
I couldn't hear what she said, so.
She said that the way the
Can we just give
PBTA
her-
calculates how each town pays is based on the miles and passengers per town. So then every year you have a recalculate based on those numbers about how much each town has to pay into for the RTA service, at least for a PBTA, that's how you do it.
Correct.
Any other questions?
Questions.
Someone in the back.
Any other questions?
All the way in the back.
Yeah.
You hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question for Carolyn first, about the rider, about the rights. So I have a disability, and do you have any three-wheel bicycle? Both my daughter and I, cannot ride the two-wheel bikes, right? And then that answer will.
That's a really good question. At the moment, we don't, although there are options for that. I think that probably the most complicated thing is, where those get taken and dropped off and where the need is. And so we don't have enough probably capacity to buy bikes to service every station or every community, but it is something that we've been thinking about. We just don't have it at the moment. And it's just an operational complication to sort of figure out, making sure that if we have such a bike that there's enough of them to serve lots of people and that they're in the right place at the right time.
So, I live in West Hampton, and it's the beginning of the big evening, western standpoint of mine. And, sort of where the MBTA stops and every stops, so we live in this kind of big hole. And, there's some microtransit options where you can call for rides sometimes, but it's weird. It's sometimes call and get rides, get volunteers to come help you, and it's just kind of a weird situation. We have a couple of great groups. Lindsay Savendos's Backs and Jim McGovern's really, really good. And they were really, really helpful. And there's some good things on the horizon. I feel really, really good with some things. However, we really suggested some stuff, like for possible bikes, that could be up at like the top of Route 66. There could be some possibly up there. There could be a route that could come up 66 from Northampton, turn around and go back down to Route 10, to East Hampton, to be a route. Because as it is, this very sad thing, my daughter lives in Northampton, she is an ADA band rider, she cannot come to West Hampton. She cannot come on the in, visit me in West Hampton because they can't. And it stops. So we have suggested a lot of different solutions, but there's very little answers. And this has been for years and years. And she's been on the Riders Council for years and years. And it's been a really difficult solution. And it all does come down to funding. And it's really difficult to get people to it's all because it's town funded. And anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've heard, I think we heard this last year, this forum and others when it comes to service in less populated areas, is there's so many different services, whether it's PT1, whether it's private microtransit provider, whether it's an RTA or an RTA with microtransit or on-demand service, that there's so many out there, and there's so many qualifications and things like that. And then the funding streams are different. Some come from it, HHS, and some come from Mass Health, et cetera. And I don't know how the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission or the Berkshire Planning Commission studies from them along with your commission bill, right? I mean, I think that could be a useful resource for overall planning, but also planning the dollars, like you say, is fair share fair. So I'm curious if your planning commissions or getting your bill over the line or just doing your bill without the legislature's involvement seems like the best resource to really get people around the table to understand the issues for the communities. But then how do you flow the dollars there?
So honestly, something that Carolyn said really, was such a good idea. The idea that bike share would be part of regional transportation. That's pretty brilliant. I hadn't considered that. I hadn't heard that before, and I hadn't considered that. And the idea that that microtransit and micromobility would be part of regional transportation, I think is a great idea. And I think that that's the way we're going to have the better chance for sustainable funding. And it's going to take a lot of work because the center of power in the state is based in the Boston metro area. And we just need to get to the voices of Western Mass, elevated and heard. But also not just Western Mass, because other parts of the state have similar regional considerations. So we in the Berkshires People are the most like us are the people on the Cape, right? And so we share a lot of those same concerns, and so bringing voices together is what we need to do. But I really like the idea of pulling together all of it under regional transportation.
I think the issue with the West Hampton, it's a little bit more complicated. And it's one of the things that we're trying to work with, you know, with the fair share funding that we receive. It's that, the interconnections between the different RTAs. Because she lives in West Hampton, PDTA only goes so far.
Yeah.
West Hampton is not a member of PDTA, so whatever service we can provide stops at whatever the line.
So
is.
does West Hampton have to opt in? Is that what
They're
the,
members of FRTA, and that's where she says they have the microtransit that Tina has.
Yeah.
And sometimes she relies on volunteer drivers to be able to provide the transportation. So what we've started to do is, as you know, the link 413
Yeah.
is the connection between the Berkshires and FRTA, and the connection between the Berkshires and PDTA. And we just started a new service 2 weeks ago between Northampton and Southwick. So it goes through East Hampton, Southampton, and Southwick. Southampton and Southwick are FRTA communities,
Okay.
but you have a bus going down 10202.
Okay.
It's actually very popular. People in Southampton and Southwick have never seen a PDTA bus goes down on their town, and the ridership is actually very, very
only 2 weeks in?
touristic.
Wow,
Over 200 passengers a week.
wow.
And so there's a lot of stuff. What we are doing, because we're only going on 10-202, it's just dividing the two towns in the middle.
Yeah.
Is that Tina is providing the microtransit to bring them to the bus stop.
That's right.
And so she's doing that in Southwick and Southampton. So she just structured that. So I did get a phone call from Representative Sabadosa about indicating or contacting the town of West Hampton to kind of show them how they can become members of PDTA. But they'll have to take two different, you know, an
Yeah,
assessment to FRTA and an assessment to PDTA, depending on the service.
Yeah.
But this is one of those connectivity grants that PDTA and FRTA can apply together to see if really this is what works for them, or is that a microtransit scenario? And you and I have talked about the PDTA taking over the Valley Bike and all that stuff, and you know, not the barriers that there are, but it's, you know, we also have 24 communities that you have to convince that this is a good idea. And once the transit authority takes it over,
right.
or if they should have taken it over, if it doesn't come with money, we're not going to reduce fixed route service to do this. So it's a give and take, and it's all about funding. And I do have a question, and I hope I answered your question and some of the things that we're trying to connect the different regions. We also have a route that goes between Pelham, Amherst to Greenfield. And so that's also in coordination. Now Tina is bringing a bus down, 2 buses down into Northampton, so that we can have a better connection between the north and the south. So we've been working on that. My question is, and you mentioned it, the supplemental budget. It's what's level funding the RTAs this year for Biscayne Place Center. So the supplemental from 26, the $25 million that is waiting for the governor to sign. We were given that money last year, the 15 RTAs, and we've used that to add service.
Okay.
So you call it one-time money, and it is in reality one-time money. What happens in 28 if there's no supplement? We're gonna have a huge cliff. And people have gotten very used to more frequent service. The routes that we operate between Northampton and Springfield. We started it as a pilot, 60 minutes. But we all know that if you drive between Northampton and Springfield, it's half an hour, really. We received funding the first year, changed it to 45 minutes. The ridership went from 7,000 a month to 10,000. Then we changed it with the second round to half an hour. That means an additional bus, 4 more drivers because of the shifts and everything. It went to 17,000 passengers. It's one of the most popular routes that we have.
Yeah.
So you know that when you make a system that it competes with the automobile, works for people, you can count on it. But if we don't have the money to continue all these changes that we've made, all these connections,
Mhm.
what's gonna happen? We get innovation or connectivity grants, but the thought is that you're gonna integrate that into your service. But if there's no, I mean, the reality of it is that fiscal year 27, and don't get me wrong, we are so tremendously grateful for the additional amount of money that we've received in the last 2-3 years.
Mhm.
But it's not, when you get the same amount of money, and even though, you know, the governor has 8 million, the Senate has 3.5 because they moved 5 million to the fair share, I mean, the fair free program. When you have increases in the liability insurance, DTA owns 5 facilities. You have 180, 190 buses, 143 vans, and you also have health insurance for almost 700 people, and you have diesel. 290 gallons of diesel is what we use every year. Currently, until June 30th, we have a futures contract for $2.80. July 1st, we're not gonna be paying that. And God only knows how long we're gonna be. So right now, gasoline is whatever is at the pump, because that's how the vehicles are fueled. But all those costs are not reflected in the funding. And you did bring up a good point, you know, the error to the MBTA, and that they do move a lot of people compared to how many people we move. But it's not fair funding. It is
It's not fair funding, and
We,
when you say you're grateful, like, I appreciate that you're saying that, but like the culture that we have created is that we in Western Massachusetts, we in the RTA areas have to be grateful for the crumbs, right? And that gets old, it's old for me, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, we just have to, you know, that RTA caucus, I think, has a lot of potential to, you know, strengthen and to be a bigger voice. So I think we should be working on that. And, you know, the narrative that you gave is really important for it to be heard. And so between, you know, Jeanette and all the EDs and then the legislature, there's a lot of legislators, right, that represent RTA areas. And I'm going to say this, and I say this with great respect. We have to advocate together more than having a nice lunch at the Omni Parker. I mean, you know, it has to be more than that. So.
one more second. You heard that too, right? So it's up to me how to advocate.
Sorry.
Anyone else? One last question? All right, well, with that, I want to thank everyone for coming, and thank our panelists, and stay cool out there. And